Hey everybody, welcome. Okay, I just went ahead and muted everyone for the background noise. If any of you would like to use your voice, please feel free to let me know. You can note that in the chat. You'd like to say something, you could raise your hand, something like that. And then you can unmute your microphone yourself. If you would like me to, I can do that for you too. Just please keep in mind that your voice will be in the YouTube recording afterward. If you want to be totally anonymous, you can write your questions in the chat. Hello, and I'll read those for you. Am I back? Yeah, I got back around 11:30 last night. Yeah, my dog and I were very happy to be home and back in our routine here. It's tough on her too, being on the airplane. Okay. Somebody says you might nod off. It's very late over there in Europe. No worries. I totally get that. You don't have to feel like you got to hang in there. I'll post this later on tonight. I usually finish the second video processing by like midnight or 1 a.m. It might be a little later tonight. I might actually end up finishing it tomorrow because I'm not quite done with the one from earlier. I had to run out and get some food because there was nothing in my house. So I missed a little bit of time this afternoon. Thank you. Okay, I am going to go ahead while you guys are typing. Feel free to type anything in the chat. I'm going to read a couple of these email questions that I got. Okay, so this person is asking, okay, hello, Meredith. I would like to get some insights to a couple questions. What if the person you were dating was not actually a complete narcissist because they actually were capable of having empathy and remorse, but they led you on and lied about their ex still living with them? Should you feel guilty or bad for not going back to them if they ask for forgiveness and second chances? According to her, she didn't tell me the complete truth. Okay. So here's the thing. Maybe that's not a person on the cluster B personality disorder. Maybe it is. Maybe that's the borderline type. And that one is really confusing because they do have empathy, some empathy. And so those are really confusing because when you see the empathy, and sometimes they have some remorse, and so you see that and you maybe don't recognize that to be one of those cluster B personality disorders. It's slightly different than the narcissist. The narcissist really has no empathy. The sociopath really has no empathy. The borderline can have empathy. And, this person was lying about their ex living with them. That's a really big deal. That's not lying about, eating ice cream when you weren't supposed to eat ice cream, or eating something of yours out of the refrigerator, or borrowing your shirt. Like having an ex living with them, that's a really big deal. That's probably something that someone on that borderline realm could do. There's a really good chance of that. So that's a possibility. The rest of the question, what is it? Can a person who is or has been abused in a relationship be or have narcissistic tendencies? Yes. A lot of these cluster B personality disorders came about because of abuse, particularly the borderline. The borderline almost always was abused growing up by one of the caretakers, one of the parents, and or had, a narcissistic, someone on the cluster B spectrum parent. Or both, right? But at least one parent is usually what happens. And so that's the tricky thing, is that they appear to be the victim because they were a victim, and they might even have gotten into an adult relationship with a much more severe cluster B, like another sociopath or psychopath or narcissist. And so there may have been more abuse. So yes. And, the danger though is you have to remember that just because someone was abused, it does not give them permission to abuse other people. Those of us who are here who have been abused, we don't abuse other people. right? You don't want to abuse someone else just because you've been abused. It's not like you don't get this free pass to like go be a big bully or go hurt other people just because you went through abuse. No, so be very cautious when approaching that, because it could be that an abusive person, was a product of abuse. And if you allow, your empathy and your compassion to override that intuition, like this may not be a good situation because this person is lying to me. And if this person is lying to you about a really big deal like that, I mean, lying isn't good in general. A lot of people tell a lot of white lies, things about, food that they eat because they're embarrassed about their weight, or, whether or not they're wearing makeup because they're self-conscious about their skin. I don't know. Like these little white lies, those are little things. But when you're talking about someone living with her ex living with her, that she's definitely hiding something that's not okay. It may even been that, she paints herself out to be the victim in that situation. I just heard this story the other day, where the ex, wouldn't leave, or the ex won't leave her alone, or the ex was always in her life and always wanting to do things with her. And she just didn't put down the boundaries, to keep the ex away. No, she wanted that ex there for some reason, it was some kind of supply, maybe financial, maybe emotional, maybe sexual, whatever that is. That's not a good situation, and probably a sign of someone who has a personality disorder. The question she also asked, how do you stop yourself from feeling bad or guilty if you run into them and decide not talk or even acknowledge them, because even if they are not a complete narcissist or kept begging for your forgiveness months after they really hurt you? How do you stop yourself from feeling bad or guilty? I think you just got to be there for yourself, and you just have to prioritize your well-being over politeness. And recognize that you don't owe anyone that politeness. Someone has hurt you. Someone has lied to you like that in a really sick way about their ex living with them. You don't have to feel guilty about that. And most of us codependents, of course, we feel guilty about that. We feel guilty about setting every boundary at the beginning. We feel shamed about setting boundaries, and that's the part you got to work on. Working on the boundaries and recognizing that you have the right to have boundaries. You have the right to have these boundaries of protection for who you are, for your values, for what's important to you, for the way that you communicate with other people, for your personal space. You have the right to set and enforce healthy boundaries. And if anyone is trying to coerce you into feeling guilty or ashamed for having that boundary, and in this case, that boundary is you don't want to talk to them, and that's perfectly fine. Like, you don't have to talk to them. You don't owe them shit. Like, after they hurt you like that, you never ever have to speak to them again. In fact, it's much, much better that you don't. That's what no contact is. And I'm not sure how long this person has been around, how much they know about no contact, but that really is the ideal way forward. It's like the center pinpoint of the boundaries moving forward, the no contact. So you just got to keep reminding yourself that that boundary is there for your safety and for your well-being. And at some point you start to believe that. At some point that starts to override the old guilt feelings that you would have, and if you have a strong amount of guilt about that, there's a possibility that you grew up with a parent like that. There's a possibility that you had that early childhood programming which said, you're not allowed to have boundaries. You're not allowed to have feelings and thoughts and needs of your own, or perceptions of reality, or boundaries, And so that could be early life programming. You want to work on that, look back to that, see, okay, were there correlations with childhood, and now as an adult, be there for yourself and give yourself permission to set those boundaries, even when that person is denying it, trying to get you to feel guilty or ashamed. You have to keep reminding yourself you have every right to have those boundaries. And those boundaries are what keep you healthy and sane. Healthy and sane. Got to have the boundaries. What else? There's some personal information. I don't want to give away too much here. Okay, so they also mentioned that, when this person does something wrong, acknowledging it only after the fact and always justifying it with something, and like the abuse from the past. And so if you ever hear this, if you ever hear someone abusing you and justifying that abuse because they were abused, walk away. Walk away. That person is using the victim card. They're playing the victim card. They're always going to play the victim card because it's their get out of jail free card. It only works if you allow it to, and I would recommend not putting up with that. Don't hang out with people like that. If they keep, justifying that, I mean, really, it has to happen one time. If they justify it one time and you're like, that's really not an excuse for abusing me, and then they go on and defend themselves some more, or worse yet, project some sort of blame onto you for that, walk away. Walk away, because that's going to get really confusing, and that's why I think the borderline is possibly the most confusing one on the cluster B, because they definitely were a victim. You almost always, you see this pattern, and oftentimes they're playing the victim. Not always, some people have like the whole victim persona. They call that the waif. The borderline has 4 archetypes. I saw this in an article. It's fantastic. 4 archetypes of the borderline personality disorder. One is the waif, WAIF, which is the victim. It's the one who's, oh, poor me, poor me, poor me. They're always, always, always the victim. Everything is about, taking care of this person. Then there's the witch, which is, the person who's like seemingly kind sometimes, and then all of a sudden, like a surprise attack like that, like out of nowhere, it's like insane amount of cruelty, borderline psychotic, and you don't know where it came from. It's terrifying. And then back to like this sweet, nice, kind person, extreme confusion in the children of that mother, or her partner, because it's like, wow, sometimes this person is like really, really good, like really good. And then, whoa, all of a sudden, the attack. Another borderline archetype is the hermit. This is the person who's, always hiding out at home, alone, very little social interaction, very, very little interaction with other people. They mostly keep to themselves. It's kind of similar to the narcissistic hermit, where they become very depressed after that. And then the other archetype of the borderline is the queen. And it could be the king, right? But this site that I was reading, this article was on borderline mothers. So you could translate this to children and partners and friends and whatnot. So the queen or the king, which is much more similar to the NPD, the narcissist, everything's about them, and it's all about worshiping them and taking care of them and fulfilling their every need and their want. But what you'll discover is that most borderlines run through these, most of them in a day, even like in a day, in a week, they go back and forth in all these different archetypes and strategies, not that different than, the different archetypes of like narcissists, for example. So, that's why I think the borderline can be the most confusing, because they have the empathy, you see the empathy come out sometimes. They have some remorse sometimes, and they're usually a product of abuse. So it can be very confusing. It could, especially for people who have like, extreme conscientiousness, like hyper conscientiousness, and like you feel so bad for them because of what they went through, that you want to help them and you want to be there for them. But that could be a very dangerous trap, and if the person doesn't get help, and if they're not reforming their character, and they're not changing, how they're owning responsibility for what they did, not a healthy person to be around, and it's sad, because you realize they're suffering and they need help, but they need to go to someone else for help, and you can't fix them. And that's really the bottom line that you got to realize, is like, you can't fix them. And do you want to sacrifice your life being the victim of this person because this person was the victim of his or her past? Probably not. I hope not, because that's not a really happy life. It's going to be very, very uncomfortable and devastating and destructive, because the borderline is like the most destructive. They're borderline psychotic when they go into that rage, and very dangerous. They have the highest suicide rate, I think, of anybody on, you know, the cluster B spectrum, and, you know, just very dangerous to be around. So I wouldn't, you know, I wouldn't get caught in the guilt. I know it's easier said than done, because it's your compassion, it's your unconditional love that you really just want to help, but you can't help everybody, and you can't fix that. Like, that person needs professional help if they want to change, if they want to own up to what they're doing now, the actions they're doing now, and deal with the past, you know, because that's where it came from. But you can't do that for that person. You don't want to sacrifice yourself. There's no amount of your love that's going to bring that person out of that. It's just not going to happen. That toxicity will bleed through everything. I think that was, the rest was just personal information. I'm not going to read that part, but okay. And then I think I had another one. Oh, someone added in here. Let me get caught up. Okay, I had a similar question. I shouldn't, but I feel awful for my ex. I feel bad for how his parents raised him and how toxic they still are towards him. And I also feel bad that he is incapable of staying in a relationship. I was the only woman who put up with him for so long and gave so much to a life with him. We had a house. Now he's in a big house alone. I wish I could not give a crap at all. This is how I know I have a lot to work on. I wish I could feel bad for someone I was close to without trying to fix it. Yeah, you know, having compassion for what happened, but also knowing where to make the cut for your own well-being and sanity. And that's really what it comes down to, you know. And yeah, you know, you're always going to have that empathy, that compassion for the pain, for the abuse, for the suffering that person went through. But it's really important to recognize that you didn't cause that and you can't fix it. There's no amount of your love that can fix that. And it's just safer to make that cut for your safety and well-being. And so, yeah, it's about doing the work, right? And continually doing that work and overriding the guilt, you know, overriding the codependent tendency to feel like you have to fix it, to feel like it's your responsibility to fix it, which, you know, if you were raised in that, you definitely, you know, were trained in that way. If you were raised by someone who had narcissistic tendencies, you were probably trained to fix, you know, their emotions. And the thing about the borderline is whatever emotion they're in, it's like you have to be in that same emotion. Like if they're upset, you're not allowed to be happy. You know, like they're going to pollute the environment of the house, the car, where the workplace, wherever you are. And it's like, they're just going to keep on it until you feel shitty because they feel shitty. Like they just won't allow you to feel good. And that's not healthy at all. You know, when someone's emotion is poisoning the entire room, the entire house, the entire office, the entire car, you know, like that, and they're like terrorizing emotionally this space, you got to get out of that. You can't fix that. And it's unfortunate, you know, that it comes from usually a bad situation, abuse from the past, and he's living alone now. That's okay. You know, and you said, you know, you were the only one who put up with him for so long and gave so much, you know, to a life with him. But, you know, I'm really happy that you're no longer there. I really am. It doesn't say anything less about you as a person. It doesn't mean you're any less compassionate or unconditionally loving. It just means that you know where you have to set the boundary for your safety, for your well-being, and for your sanity. Okay, someone asked her, how long are you no contact? She says, I broke it the other day. I was a little over a month. It didn't set me back too much, thankfully, and I'm still strong on not letting him come near me. I told him to stop torturing himself. I feel like I'm actually in a good place, and now he's telling me he's going to get rid of the dogs and move far, far away. It's ridiculous. Yeah, I mean, the thing is that they will say things to manipulate those emotions. They know. He knows that you have this hyper conscientiousness. He knows that you have a big sense of compassion. He knows that it's important to you to love other people and to treat other people with kindness and compassion. And so he'll exploit that. And so when he's telling you, that he's going to get rid of the dogs and move far away, that's a manipulation tactic. That's to try to get you, to help him, to talk to him. I'm glad that it didn't set you back too much. And I'm glad that you're back. I hope you're back to no contact now. But unfortunately you can't fix that. Like you mentioned, you told him to stop torturing himself. And that really is the word. It's like torture, it seems, the borderline especially, because they have so much emotion. It's so unregulated, overwhelming, and it's just so toxic, heavy toxic emotions. And if they don't deal with it, it does torture them. But he's an adult now, and it's on him to deal with it, not you. It's on him to deal with that. And if he doesn't like the way that it's torturing him, that he's torturing himself, he would seek change. He would seek help. But if he's not, then he's willing to settle for that, So there's really nothing you could do for him, unfortunately. And it's really better that you make the cut for your sanity and well-being. That pretty much answers a lot when you said it's not worth it, my sanity. Yeah, it's not, because you will lose your sanity there. You will. It's like inevitable. Maybe not the first day, maybe not the second day, but it gets there, and it gets there quick. And then it's like you're in quicksand, like all of a sudden you're going down, and like you don't know how to get back out, because like you're just getting sucked down in it. And that's how it works. It's the bleeding of toxicity like that, and it will destroy you. And, it's just, you're better off without that. You're so much better off without that. Working on the things within you that you need to work on, and eventually someday, attracting a healthy partner, not someone who's going to suck the life out of you to try to fix them, or just to try to deal with the everyday reality. If he wants help, he's going to get professional help. Someone added, I'm 1 year and I did break no contact. They get worse. Yeah. The other person said, he asked me to watch the dogs a day ago. Well, he was out of town. Ha ha ha. Kind of a contradiction from getting rid of the dogs. Right. But probably he knows you love the dogs, right? So, he's like, well, that's a button I could push. The dogs. I've heard a lot of people using dogs like ransom, emotional, blackmail. People use children like this, unfortunately, too. But often in the case of dogs, it didn't work. Good. Good job. Yeah, it's really tough when they bring in the kids or the dogs and stuff like that. And, in him asking you to watch the dogs was really him trying to get in contact with you, to have an interaction with you, to get back in your life. That's really what that is. So I'm really glad it didn't work. I'm glad you set and stuck to that boundary, because that's really key. Because when you set a boundary, and then if you compromise it and you're like, well, okay, right, then they know they can keep doing that. They know they can keep abusing your boundaries, because they know that you're just going to, second guess them, that you're going to take it back and say, okay, never mind, let's roll with that. So I'm glad that you made that decision. I know it's really tough, especially when they're pulling on your heartstrings and on other beings, whether they're fur babies or human babies, and they pull on your heartstrings and they use them as pawns, as emotional blackmail. And that's just a really toxic situation. So you did good. And hopefully, moving forward with no contact, because it will escalate. Like right now he's hoovering a little with the dogs and talking about moving. And talking about moving is, obviously it's for you to be like, no, don't go, but I'll miss you. That's the reaction that they're looking for. And you don't want to fall into that trap either. Like whatever he does, that's his life. If he moves, if he stays, whatever, but none of that should be affecting you. That should be his deal. And you just focus on you moving forward. Okay, I'm going to wait for you ladies to add another question or something. Let me see if I can find this other email question. Okay, so I got this question from this person watching videos. She's confused whether or not her ex-boyfriend is a narcissist or not. She really cares about him and loves him a lot. She says he portrays some characteristics like the triangulation, bringing up ex-girlfriends, another girl that's his friend. He always takes her word over the girlfriend, blames her for everything. Everything she does is a problem. And it seems like she's being manipulative and out to hurt him. Right, because he's twisting that around. They always twist it around to make it seem like you're the manipulative one. You're the one hurting them because you're not giving them what they want. You're not doing what they want. You're not getting jealous. She said it didn't bother her, when he talks about the ex, you're not getting jealous when he's trying the triangulation. The whole point is to make you jealous. So if you don't respond with that jealousy, that's going to piss him off, and then maybe he's accusing you of being the manipulative one and hurting him. She said she got to the point where she felt so drained and she was begging him to stay, which is something she normally wouldn't do. But she said the weird thing is that he didn't pursue her after. In fact, I liked and told him so. And when we broke up before and got back together again, I was the one to attempt to move on, and he didn't move on. He also never used any charm to get me at all. I'm so confused because we are both still really young. Maybe he's just being immature. Is there something wrong with me? So, the thing about the narcissistic spectrum and whatnot is that there is definitely this degree of immaturity, like the emotional immaturity. It's like the emotional level of a toddler. And so you're young. This person's really young. I don't know how young. These personality disorders start to develop sometimes, by the time a person is like in the late teens, early 20s. Sometimes it doesn't come out until even the mid 20s, going on 30. It could just be that it was like kind of dormant, and then all of a sudden something triggers it, like some kind of like devastating experience that happened that triggered the borderline, symptoms. Or it could be that it was just a gradual progression. It could be that, this person's like 12 or even teenager, and they're already showing signs of borderline. They're cutting themselves. They're aggressive with other people. There's substance abuse, impulse control problems, bullying. That, the antisocial personality disorder often shows up, as delinquency, in teenagers or children, this sort of behavior already as a young child, like, really aggressive bullying, that sort of stuff. It can definitely start to happen, pretty young. Sometimes, like I said, it could, suddenly just show up later, though usually there's some warning signs if you know a person, and you really can see back in the history. This definitely sounds like, the cluster B type of personality. I'm not sure which one of them, but all of these things that this person is mentioning are textbook signs, textbook tactics that they use. And, even getting you to take actions that you wouldn't do, like begging him to stay, which you normally wouldn't do, but you got to the point where you're so drained, right? Like, because every victim gets to that point where they're just exhausted from the fighting, from the arguing, from the circular conversations and everything, and just like trying to get through. Or the other person's just shut down and you're just so desperately trying to talk to them. Or when they use sleep deprivation tactics to make you utterly exhausted to the point where like you can't even sleep, you can't rest. And then in the daytime, your energy is so low that you can't really focus, you can't think clearly when the abuse is taking place. And that's even easier for them to twist it around, like she said, and then thinking, she was being manipulative and thinking she was out to hurt him because he convinced her of that. And, it's best just to let them go. She also mentioned that, what was it? He never used any charm to get me at all. She didn't mention anything about sex. It could have been that he used the sex to get her. That's often what happens. Sometimes like the psychopathic types don't use the charm sometimes. Sometimes they just straight up come in with sex and aggressive sex or BDSM sorts of sexual realms, or just really, really intense, maybe even like amazing kind of sex. And it confuses you into thinking that there's a deeper intimacy and connection than there actually is. So, she said she's confused. That is the number one sign of the abuse taking place. When the person's like, they're really confused about what's going on. Is this person a manipulator or are they just a jerk? Probably both, probably a manipulator and he's a jerk. And no, there's not something wrong with you. That's her last question. Is there something wrong with me? No. But the longer you stay around that, the more you're going to think that the problem is you. The more you're going to think that you're crazy. The more you're going to think that you're doing something to deserve that abuse. So stay away from this person. Stay no contact. He says he didn't try to attempt to get back with you. That's good. Just let that go. Maybe he never comes back. Sometimes the parasitic psychopathic types, they'll suck you dry. They'll suck the host dry, whether it's finances or sex or energy or their house or their car or whatever resources. And then they eventually, corrupt everything and ruin everything and leave that person with nothing. And then they move on to the next host and they start sucking them dry. And so, when the ex doesn't have anything more for them to feed off of, they don't contact that ex anymore because they know they need to find a new victim. They need to find a new host with fresh resources, and so it could be in this case, one of those. But my suggestion to this person is just stay no contact. Don't reach out to this person. Don't try to figure out what they're doing. Don't try to stalk them on social media. Just block and delete all of that. Stay away from that. Do not respond to any hoovering attempts. Okay, let's see. Okay, the person earlier said she's trying to learn how to be alone. It's hard. She's never done it. Yeah, it is hard at first when you've never been alone, because the being alone also can trigger that devastating sense of loneliness that's probably been with you all your life. If you grew up in one of these dynamics, you probably feel like this devastating sense of loneliness, and so that's how we get hooked as adults in these situations with abusive people, because they come in with the idealization and the love bombing and the flattery and the sex. And it's confusing because you think this person is really into you. And suddenly now your brain is flooded with all these delicious brain chemicals. And that's much preferable than to feel this empty, lonely, devastating feeling, right? And so we become addicted to that. And so that's the work that you have to do, is to be there with yourself, to learn to be alone and love that, when you are alone and spending time alone with yourself and giving yourself time to play, to have fun, to do art, to do hobbies, to explore things you're just curious about. Because when you play like that and have fun, it seems silly as an adult, but it's important because that's helping the inner child. That's healing for the inner child, is play, fun, exploration, curiosity, and all of that reawakens your creativity, because your inner child is your connection to your creativity. So when your inner child is really hurt and wounded, probably not flowing with creativity, probably not feeling creative, probably not doing creative things with work or with life or with your passions, or even like getting into anything that really makes you feel excited and fun in life. So it's really important to set time aside to do that. And then also it's important to cultivate a new social relationship with other people, new social connections, reconnecting with people who are healthy, not the toxic people from the past, but healthy friends, healthy family members, people who truly love you and support you, reconnecting with them, because during the abuse, there's the isolation factor where the victim gets isolated, usually physically, but definitely perceptually from other people. So even if your friends lived far away in another state or another country, you guys communicated on the phone or on texting or on email or on the Facebook or something like that, and you had some connection, and then that just like it got less and less and less because you became totally consumed in this relationship. You weren't reaching out, or maybe they were even like plotting ideas in your head of like, that person's out to get you, or that person doesn't really love you like they do. Nobody loves you like they do. And so you start putting everything, all your eggs in this basket. And sometimes they're just flat out threatening you that you can't have, these exterior relationships outside of them. And so it's really important to cultivate, new social relationships moving forward. And sometimes when you're taking an inventory of your friends list and your family list, and you're like, wow, I'm just, totally surrounded by toxic people, and you got to get all that out. And then, you look and you're like, so who's left, and then you got to start over. And that's when you got to start meeting new people. Little by little, you could start getting out there a little more, start talking to some new people, start getting a sense, for how you feel around these people, always tuning in, how do you feel around these new people? Because if you feel really good, and of course not to that extent where it's this intense, overwhelming brain high, because then you're a victim of the idealization of the love bombing, right? But when you just feel good, you feel at ease, you feel at peace, that's a good sign. That means you're with good quality people. When you feel kind of upbeat and even energized after meeting with these people or even talking on the phone, that's a good sign, versus feeling drained, which is a sign of being with a toxic person. When you're around a toxic person, you're going to feel just exhausted afterward, or maybe even during the conversation, you're like trying to like keep your eyes open. You can't even keep your eyes open because you developed this sudden case of like narcolepsy, because the energy has just been sucked right out of you. And maybe it's like the conversation wasn't like violent or aggressive or about anything really. They were just talking, but it was just their energy that was so draining. They call these energy vampires. And so if you see those signs, those are not good signs. But, starting to create these new social relationships moving forward is really important, to have a support network, to have healthy people that you go and hang out with a little bit here and there. And, it doesn't have to be a deep friendship at first. It can start off slow. Maybe you meet a couple times a month, maybe even once a month. You get together for a couple hours because, distance and traveling and work situations and all that. And once a month is all you can organize, but you hang out for a few hours. Maybe you get a drink, maybe you get coffee, maybe you just like hang out and just talk, or maybe you go for a walk in the park or whatever. But slowly, little by little, starting to redevelop these social situations, these social connections and relationships with people is really key moving forward. Okay, let me get caught up here. So, okay, I'm going to go back and then I'm going to jump around here to follow up on that. Someone says, it's crazy that I felt alone most of my life when I was surrounded by people. They were just toxic. It took me a while to see it. Even I was until I did the self-work. Yeah. I have to say, I love the friends that I kept in my life, near and far. I feel the love no matter what. I am grateful every day for those people who glow within themselves. Good. So you have some good quality people, some healthy people in your life. That's excellent. So keep cultivating those friendships, those relationships. And yeah, you mentioned feeling so alone, even when you're surrounded by people, that's when you really know it's a bad situation. When you're surrounded by people and you still feel alone, those aren't the right people. If you're hanging out in a group of people and you just don't really feel like you're part of that, maybe whatever they're talking about, maybe they're just gossiping, or they're just talking about stuff that you don't care about, and you just can't really connect with them, feeling alone. Or maybe you have some opinions that they don't agree with at all, and they attack, your point of view, and then you feel like uncomfortable, like, to hang around them, and you don't even want to like talk about things that you think about or believe in. Not really a healthy situation. So if you notice that you feel really alone when you're surrounded by people, probably not the right people. Okay, let me go back to this. Someone asked, is there hope for borderlines if they get help? Apparently, allegedly, the borderline is the only one on the cluster B personality disorder that does have hope for change. That's according to the literature that I've read. They have these, DBT we were talking about in the earlier session today, dialectical behavioral therapy. Apparently, that's the best therapy for borderlines. Sometimes they talk about using the CBT, which is the cognitive behavioral therapy. But, according to Dr. George Simon, the cognitive behavioral therapy, that's part of traditional psychotherapy, as far as I understand. And traditional psychotherapy, as he said, does not apply to the people in the cluster B personality disorders, because they don't follow the same rules and standards of consciousness. Of conscientiousness that most of us do. They're aware that they don't have the same kind of conscience that the rest of us do. And so it doesn't apply to them, and you have to address the character, is what he was saying. You have to address their character disorder, which is the fact that this is their way of being in the world. It's not a mental illness. It's who they choose to be. And, he talked about utilizing shame to try to help a person, have that like come to Jesus moment where they realize what they're doing and realize that they don't want to be that person. They don't want to be remembered like that. They don't want to leave that legacy, of being this awful, manipulative, abusive person. And if you can touch that shame, and if that person has the inner desire to change, if they actually want to be a different person, then there's hope. But if that person doesn't want to change, there is no hope. They have to want to. You can bring a horse to the water, but if they don't want to drink, they're not going to drink. You can't like force them. You can shove its face in the water, but it's probably going to get mad at you. It might kick you, it might bite you, it might run away. You can't force someone to change. That has to come from within. And, he was talking about external motivation sometimes helping people to change. Maybe there's a financial threat or pressure, losing a house, losing a job, losing spousal support, or losing a relationship with a child or something like that. And sometimes, the external motivation works, but as he said, and I also agree, the external motivation is the worst kind of motivation. It's not permanent. It usually doesn't last long. It's usually that person just did it just because they wanted this. There's an ulterior motive. They wanted this, so they did this. Whereas when it comes from within, the intrinsic motivation, the internal motivation, that's a whole different thing. And when a person actually wants to change for themselves just because they want to be someone different, that's a whole different situation. So in my opinion, I only think that there's hope when the person wants to change. And to want to change means they have to admit what they're doing. They have to own it. They have to take accountability for their actions, for being a manipulative person, and if they can't take that accountability, they probably don't want to change. So someone else is here. I think if caught early enough, as far as my borderline grandma goes, I have no hope. She's set in her ways. Yeah, I think that, if people notice these patterns in children and they can intervene in time before like the ego and the personality is like fully developed in that child, definitely better to get them while they're young, into some sort of treatment as you mentioned, once people get much older, they tend to be a lot more set in their ways, and it's a lot harder to get them to want to change because, as Dr. Simon said too in that interview, why do they do this? Why do they use these manipulative tactics? Because it works. So if the person likes getting their way and likes, dominating the emotional atmosphere and likes everybody else to drop what they're doing, to fulfill the whims and expectations of their emotions or their demands, and they like that, and they like that sort of control and power that they have over people, probably not going to want to change. It has to come from within, I think. Someone says she is cray cray. I love my grandmother, but she is always causing a scene. I will even talk to her about it, and she will own up to what she does and do it again. I think she feels deep shame, but doesn't know what else to do to get her needs met. That's really a shame. It's interesting that you can talk to her about it openly, that she can own it, and then continues to do it. So you're right, that does sound like that borderline thing where they have some empathy, because she can obviously empathize. Like if you talk to her about it and you're like, it really hurts when this or that, or, when you do this or that, and other people tend to feel this or that way about it, she can see that and own it. But the fact that she keeps doing it again means she's not changing. And you mentioned that you think she feels deep shame about it. So that's the remorse that sometimes the borderlines have, that sense of remorse, feeling the shame about it, but not knowing what else to do to get her needs met. So she's set in her ways of knowing that she uses these emotional manipulation tactics to get what she wants, and rather than asking for what she wants. That's interesting that doesn't occur to them, right? Because I imagine this isn't the only case. There's probably lots of cases like this. My grandfather died of a heart attack, and she said she was abandoned. Her view is very different. She is extremely fearful of being alone. That's sad. Yeah, that is the key of the borderline, is this incredible fear of abandonment. It's like the core key differentiation, besides the empathy and the occasional remorse, is that fear of abandonment. And they will go to all sorts of lengths to protect themselves from abandonment. And usually they manipulate to avoid being abandoned. And when people get to that breaking point with them where they're like, I just can't deal with it anymore. I'm not going to do this anymore. I can't do this anymore. And then, they use the manipulation to try to get you to stay. You're the only one who can help me. You're the only one who's ever been there. The only one who's really loved me for who I am. I just don't know what I would do without you. This sort of thing. That's all emotional blackmail to get you to hang around. And then they're playing on your sense of self-importance to feel like, well, okay, so I must matter. I must be important if I'm the only one who can help you. This dangerous way that they'll emotionally blackmail people. I call her daily, which keeps her at bay. I read books on how to deal with her. It has gotten a lot better. However, with narcs, I see no possibility of resolution. Yeah, that's very generous of you, not only to still have her in your life, but to call her daily, very generous of your time and energy. And you're educating yourself, you're even reading books on learning how to deal with her. Most people probably wouldn't. Most people would probably just run away. She's probably very, very lucky that you're willing, to call her on the phone and to have some sort of relationship with her. I educate her too, and she finds it really interesting. Wow. Wow. Yeah. Sometimes what interests them, I think, is the sense of importance, like reading the literature or the things, the characteristics and whatnot. Some of them almost gain like a sense of self-importance when they read about this stuff. Like my mom found the idea of gaslighting fascinating and how it came from this movie. And this is what happened in the movie. And she got like really into that. And I was like, wow, okay, So it was almost like she liked that. Like she liked the fact that there was information about this, and this is something that she does. And that's still a toxic pattern. You still want to be careful around that. And, hopefully you have some solid boundaries with her, loving with limits, loving with boundaries, because you want to make sure that you're still safe, and that doesn't poison you too much. And if you're able to manage the boundaries, if she doesn't live near you and you have the phone conversations and you're able to manage it so that it's not, creating toxicity in your life, then that's okay. As long as you feel that you're okay, that you're safe, and that you're sane, and that you can interact with her in a limited, protected way in order to maintain your safety and well-being, then she's a very, very lucky woman that you're willing to do that. Okay, someone asked here, hi, I'm new here. Welcome. And I want to say, I love your videos and energy. Thanks you so much for doing this. I would like to know, what is the best way to stop feeling guilty for avoiding or not acknowledging a toxic person who hurt you when you run into them? I recently went to an event where I ran into a toxic ex who was hoovering me for almost 8 months since I went no contact. And when we ran into each other, he didn't even acknowledge me. I didn't either, but I feel like maybe it was an immature move on my part, but I'm just too hurt by everything. Immature to not acknowledge him? No, you're totally allowed to do that. You're totally allowed to do that. That's what no contact is. No contact is, if you see them in public, you don't have to say anything. Sometimes I made a video about this. Sometimes some people find it easier to do something like, hey, and walking away, like still moving away from them, keeping the body language directed away from them and keeping the body moving so that you're not stopping to get hooked into the conversation, and some people this is maybe the narcissist that, you just kind of interacted with a little bit, like, hey, and then you keep going. You try not to make it too awkward. If this is like an ex, like someone that you've been with for a long time, personally, I wouldn't even acknowledge that if I saw them. Like if we were together and we went through like a really traumatic situation and it took me a long time to recover from that relationship, I would just not even look at them, not at all. I wouldn't acknowledge them. And that's just the no contact. And that's to keep you safe, to not get hooked back in, to not get, into a conversation, to not, because if you're feeling guilty for not talking to them at all, imagine if like they cornered you and started talking to you. It could be that your guilt like overrides your rationality, and like you find yourself in that conversation and like hooked into this, and then that toxicity sticks to you. And then like worst case scenario, like you end up like back in contact with this person. It could be dangerous. So it's really a good idea just to go no contact, okay, this is a toxic ex. So it was an ex. So yeah, if I were you in that situation, I think you did the best thing, not to acknowledge it, not to acknowledge him. If I were you, I would just keep moving forward like that, no contact, no acknowledgement. If you should see him in public again, don't even, you mentioned too that he was hoovering for almost 8 months since you went no contact. So that means that when he saw you and he didn't even acknowledge you, he was attempting to punish you with that, because he was hoovering, which was his way of trying to get you back. And if you didn't respond to that and you didn't give in to that and you didn't give him what he wanted from that, then he's going to use something to punish you. It sounds like was the silent treatment. It was like he did that to make you feel self-conscious, to make you feel insecure, maybe to try to get you to want to reach out to him and text him or contact him on social media and like apologize for not saying hi or something. Like these are definitely manipulation tactics that manipulators use. So I think you handled that really well. There's nothing immature about that. You handled that really well. And I would stick to that moving forward. No contact, no acknowledgement, because you run the danger of getting swept back in. And it could happen faster than you even realize. Like you might even go there with strong resolve. Like, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. And then he's in your face and he's talking to you. And, you know, it triggers this old connection. It like re-triggers the trauma bond, and you're right back in it. Like subconsciously it takes over, and your conscious mind just doesn't even see it. It doesn't even control it at all, because the subconscious is taken over and you got hooked back in. So I would move forward with the no contact, and you did a good job. Don't feel guilty about that. I know that's easier said than done, you know. So what is the best way to stop feeling guilty? Just, you know, giving yourself the validation that you don't owe him, you don't owe anyone your politeness. You don't, especially someone who has a track record of hurting you. You don't owe him shit. You don't owe him anything. He hurt you, right? And you don't owe him compassion. And just because you're not compassionate with him doesn't mean you're not a compassionate person. That's the inner conflict often that the codependent's dealing with. Like, that's the guilt, because you feel like, well, if I don't say hello and if I'm not, you know, compassionate, then I must be a bad person. You know, possibly he even like tried to convince you of that before, you know, when you weren't doing that. And so like, understand that they will specifically try to provoke those things, those qualities in you, and make you feel guilty. You know, use the guilt tripping in subtle ways to make you feel like you owe them something. You owe him nothing. So remind yourself that that boundary, the no contact boundary, is there for your health and for your sanity. So you can move forward, so you can heal from this, so you can move forward and self-heal, that you can become a new person with, you know, who's stronger, who's wiser, who's extracted some kind of lesson from this and moving forward. Because if you don't have that resolve, if you don't have that boundary, it's a really good chance that you'll get sucked back in. Yes, he was hoovering hard, asking for a relationship and second chances. Then when he actually saw me, he just ignored me completely. Yeah, that's what they do. That's the cognitive dissonance. They say one thing, they do the other thing, right? Everything you said makes sense. I kept no contact because I know I have codependency tendencies. Thank you so much for talking about that compassion. That is exactly what was keeping me stuck. Yeah, I think this was keeping most of us stuck, you know? So when you feel that kick in again, because it will, right? Because it's going to be training. You're going to have to train that out of your, you know, guilt behavior. So over time, you'll be able to train that out of your behavior. You'll be able to train out the guilt. But at first, you really kind of have to like psych yourself up, you know, and like, if you're going to go someplace where like, you know, there's a good chance, like, I don't know if that was just like a random encounter or if you kind of expected to run into him. But if you go somewhere where like, you know, you have a better chance of running into him, you might want to really pump yourself up, you know, practice it in the mirror, like what you're going to do if you see him, you know, or just like convince yourself and just tell yourself over and over again that if you see him, look away, just go, like have purpose, moving in a direction, doing something, or, you know, if you have to, just get out of that situation, get out of that place so that you don't get sucked into that, and just do whatever you can do to not get sucked into that. We're actually graduating together in 2 days. I'm anxious. Okay, so you know that you're going to see him. So you have the next 2 days to prepare, you know, to talk yourself up, and to remind yourself, I am a compassionate being. My compassion has limits for my health and sanity. You know, you don't have to have compassion for Hitler. I had an abusive teacher, like a guide, you know, in the spiritual realm with psychedelic medicine, who was trying to tell me how, you know, even people like Hitler deserve compassion, and who has compassion for Hitler. And he was hinting at the fact that if I didn't have compassion for Hitler, I wasn't a compassionate person. But something just smelled like shit. And I was like, no, I'm not buying into that. Like, I get it. He was a human being, a sentient being like the rest of us, but he hurt and killed a lot of people. No, I don't owe him my compassion. I'm sorry. I don't care what he went through as a child. It doesn't give him the right to do that as an adult. You know, so remind yourself that your compassion has limits, and that's healthy. You know, having limits on your compassion is what allows you to share that compassion with people who deserve it. because if you continually give your compassion to abusive people, you're going to be sucked dry of that compassion. And eventually you'll be so jaded that you won't have compassion left for people, so recognize that the compassion has a boundary, and that's to protect you, to keep you safe, to keep your sanity and your health there. Boundaries have to be firm, someone added in. Indeed. I heard once, sometimes compassion is saying no. Exactly. Because you have to say no for your well-being. You can't say yes to everything. Even if it's not an abusive person, maybe you have a neighbor and, it's like a single mom and it's really hard for her. And she asked you to watch the kids one day because maybe you're, at home mom, you're busy, you got things to do, but she asked you to watch this kid. It's like an emergency. She's got to go to this job interview or do this thing. And you agree to watch the kid. And then she keeps trying to pawn the kid off on you. Okay, I got to do this. Can you watch my kid? And so you got to set that boundary, I've got stuff planned for my family, or my family and I are doing this. And you got to let her know that just because you're at home and you're raising your kids at home doesn't mean that, it's just wide open for anybody to come and dump their stuff on you, that you can't take on everybody's responsibility. You could be like, yeah, I'll watch the kid this Tuesday, but not every Tuesday, And so setting those limits is what allows you to have the energy to watch the kid this Tuesday, some Tuesdays, but not every Tuesday, so understand that compassion has limits for a reason, and you have every right to set those boundaries. Otherwise you become a doormat, someone added in. Exactly. I missed one here earlier. This person said, I'm finding it best to do that. Gray rock is easiest for me. It's funny how you can go in so strongly, but they can pull you back in. For me, it's when it's in person, and I refuse to put myself in that position ever again. Yeah, because that's the thing, is when you're in person with the person, you're feeling their energy. You're touching, even though you're standing 6 feet apart, you're already touching. Your energetic fields are touching. You're already exchanging information, and just seeing the sight of that person can re-trigger you into the trauma bond, especially if it's fresh. If it's within the first 6 months to a year, it could definitely re-trigger that trauma bond, or it can re-trigger, this deep sense of compassion for what they're going through. And then you're sucked in before you know. So it's really important to be super clear about your boundaries with yourself. It's got to start with you. You got to be clear with yourself that you're not willing to compromise that boundary no matter what tactic they use. And that person is going to use a guilt tripping tactic because they know that it's worked in the past. They know that you have a lot of compassion, and so they can use the guilt tripping tactic to get to you. So trust that will happen, trust that somehow they will use one of those tactics, and be very clear with yourself on your boundary. You're not going to talk to them. You're not going to get sucked back in. Thank you. I can sleep better tonight. Oh, I know it sucks when you can't sleep because you're going to run into them, or worse yet, people who work in these situations. Thankfully you're graduating in 2 days, and hopefully you don't ever have to see this person again. But people who are still at work in these situations, losing sleep over that, dreading going into work every day because what you're going to have to face. You have to have some contact about work, and that you're limiting everything else. You're not talking about anything personal, anything emotional, but that just this opening of talking about work is still enough that person is going to try that stuff, even if they're manipulating your work, your production at work, or your performance at work, or somehow invading your space at work. It's a horrible situation to be in. And eventually, usually you just got to get out of that situation, because, you can set the new boundaries, and it's good practice. In the meanwhile, it's good practice setting the boundaries, enforcing the boundaries, and doing it day after day after day, right? Because the more you practice it, the more it just becomes second nature. So approach every one of those situations, even the surprise ones. If you can try to set an anchor in your mind, okay, if I see him, immediately I'm going to take this as a lesson. This is a boundary lesson. If you could try to set this up in advance, if I see him or her, I will immediately recognize this as a lesson to set and enforce my boundaries. And if you can keep reminding yourself, this is a lesson, and just keep showing up with 100%, with the best of you every time, you're going to be stronger. Those boundaries are going to be easier. You know, the next time your neighbor's like, yo, hey, can you watch the kids? I'm really sorry, but I have these activities planned for today. And that's it. It's just like, it flows off your tongue so easily. You know, the more you practice it, the easier it is for it to come out, because the less the guilt and the shame is like stopping the words like right here from even like exiting your mouth, you know? So practice, practice, practice. Okay. We have to devise a way to manage abusers with the situation where you can't go no contact. Gray rock is something I couldn't make. I was lucky to have complete no contact. Oh my God, not sure how I would implement gray rock. Gray rock is hard. You know, those situations at work, it's like next level boundary issues. Worse yet, people who share a child with someone on the cluster B personality disorder. That person has signed up for a lifetime of boundary lessons. And it could be that that is like the biggest lesson that person is working with. Usually that has something to do with a Saturn aspect in the natal chart, where Saturn is placed, in which house, in which sign, or what kind of alignment, aspect, conjunction it has with another planet or another sign. Usually there's something to do with Saturn that's in an interesting position when a person has these like lifetime issues of boundaries to work on. Because if you're sharing a child with them, you're always going to have some contact. It's not just the first 18 years, because something will come up, you know, something financial, a graduation, a wedding, the birth of a child, the baptism of a child. I mean, it could be a lifetime of, you know, always knowing that you're going to have to run into this person at the family thing, or, you know, especially in those first 18 years where you definitely have to have more contact, because you got to arrange the pickup and the drop off of the kids, you know, school activities, trips, health things for the kids, you know, there's always going to be stuff like that. And so that's when you got to use the gray rock, you know, nothing emotional, nothing personal, keeping it strictly about the kids. If it's work, it's strictly about work, nothing personal. If it's kids, strictly kids, nothing personal. Don't tell them who you're seeing. Don't tell them if you're seeing someone. Don't tell them that you're single. Don't tell them that you're happy, that you're sad, that you ate a piece of chocolate cake that day. Don't tell them anything that doesn't have to do with the kids, you know, and better yet, keep it in writing, you know, email or text, but, you know, don't want to get into a conversation, you know, and if you have to get into a phone conversation because it's just easier to make the arrangements with the kids, keep it short, keep it under 2 minutes, be busy, always be busy. And think about the most boring thing you can say. Like if they're really, really pushing, they're pushing for gossip, they're pushing for contact, just start talking about the most boring, mundane thing, you know, maybe even something gross, like your dog's bowel movements or something, and whatever, but like just whatever you have to do to like unhook that person and make them realize they're not going to get anything juicy out of you. They're going to have to go somewhere else to get something juicy. That person from earlier said, yes, it took me like 2 weeks to recover from that encounter. I'm still dealing with it, and I hope I can handle it better after graduation day. Yeah, 2 weeks isn't too bad. Sometimes people, you know, get really set back. Sometimes one breaking of no contact can set a person back to 0 point, like the very beginning of the recovery. I mean, it could be like a year later, you know, or something, months and months later, and all the way back, you know, like a rubber band, like it just happens so fast and right back in it. It could happen. 2 weeks is not bad. That means you're definitely moving forward, you know, in your progress and your self-healing. And I wish you a lot of luck, and I'll be sending you really good vibes for your graduation day. And you know what, just focus on you. That is your big day. Like, never mind that person, you know, this is nothing to do with them. This is all about you. You worked really hard to get to graduation day. You worked really hard, and pat yourself on the back and give yourself, you know, that compliment, give yourself that accolade for how hard you worked, you know, and that this graduation is about you. It's about you and your hard work and your future and where you're going to take that and what you're going to do with that degree that you're earning, and that's what I would focus on if I were you, because, you can either focus on your problems or you can focus on purpose, but usually not both at the same time. And if you're focused on purpose, you're generating this beautiful thing that's growing and it's in front of you and it's moving and magnetizing you forward. If you are focusing on your problems, you're getting sucked back into the gravity of the past because the problems happened in the past and they're continuing now, right? So keep redirecting yourself. Even if you see that guy or that girl, I'm sorry, I forget, I think it was a guy. You see that person, you're aware that they're sitting there, just try to talk yourself out of that hypervigilance, right? Because that's the hypervigilance. You're going to show up that day and you're going to be scanning, psychically, you're scanning that whole environment. Where is he? Where is he? Where is he? Where is he? Where is he going to pop up? Where is he going to pop up? Right? So maybe once you've located that person, or even in your mind, just push that away and redirect your focus to the importance of that day, the celebration of that day, your success, and how hard you worked to earn that degree. And that is all about you. That has nothing to do with that person, and just dreaming about your future and what you're going to do with that moving forward, your plans for the future, your purpose, what you're building, that sort of thing. Celebrate your success and envision the future, and never mind all that bullshit. Easier said than done, right? But, if you can psych yourself up for this going into graduation day, and then that after graduation day, hopefully you just don't have to run into this person anymore, and then it won't be an issue. I get triggered and my mind goes wild, even though I know I'm making the right decision for my emotional health and sanity. I don't know if he's a narcissist, but toxic for sure. Yeah, it doesn't matter. You don't have to get hung up on the labels, because you could waste a lot of energy on that. And that could even get really tricky and dangerous, because if you're like, well, maybe he's not like a total narcissist, right? And then you get sucked, into it. You start giving him the benefit of the doubt. That's a slippery slope, right? So go ahead and label that as toxic, if that's the word you want to use. Label that as toxic, and trust that you're making the right decision to not allow that toxicity in your life, because that toxicity will bleed through your life. It will bleed through your life, and it will ruin your life. It will ruin your happiness. It will make it very hard to move forward and accomplish things, so trust that you made the right decision. And this is about you. This is about your health and your sanity, moving forward. And you're not alone. So many people, millions of people have been victims of these kinds of toxic manipulators, and they will all tell you the same story. And almost everybody feels just like you, the guilt and setting the boundaries, right? Triggering your mind going wild, the hypervigilance of scanning the environment for this person. We all go through this. That's part of the process. You're not alone. You're not crazy, and you made the right decision. You definitely did. Okay, someone was talking about the gray rock not giving narcissistic supply. Yeah, that's what they're looking for. And that's what the gray rock is about. It's not giving them anything juicy. Nothing interesting to see here. That's the vibe you want to put out. Nothing interesting to see here. Don't be strutting like you got the most interesting life, or you're the most attractive person. Definitely don't do that. Don't even put out that vibe, because remember, these people intuitively, uncannily hone in on your vulnerabilities, right? So they're going to tune into that. So you want to put out the energy and the vibe of, there's nothing interesting here, nothing interesting to see, nothing interesting to get involved with. I'm just busy, and it's boring busy. It's not interesting busy. It's just tedious, boring busy. And they'll move on because they're looking for something juicy. Okay, yeah, I do that. I go super boring. Yeah, be boring, uninteresting, unopinionated, because that brand of narcissist, maybe you had interactions with them, where you have an opinion. It doesn't matter what that opinion is, even if they previously expressed agreeing with that opinion, even if that day they expressed agreeing with that opinion. And you state an opinion, and then they take the devil's advocate, and they're like, well, no, and they're putting that opinion down, and they're arguing that opinion, and you're confused, and you're like, but I thought we were already on the same page, and you acknowledged that. And then now you're swept into some sort of self-defense and argument, and it's exhausting, right? No opinions. Because if you have an opinion, that could be a dangerous thing, you know, because all they have to do is take the opposite side and then start like provoking you, you know, so boring, uninteresting, unopinionated. That's the core of gray rock. Someone else said, yes, it's about your accomplishments to the graduate. Yes, it is. That's about you. That's about your hard work, your success, your accomplishments. Celebrate that. I did work super hard. 4.0. Good job. That's awesome. Great job. Yeah, everybody else is giving their compliments and congratulations. Thank you for the validation. Thank you, everyone. You needed this. Good. Good. Sometimes you really need that validation, you know, from other people who get it, because it's just like, sometimes it's just so hard to give it to yourself. Like eventually you need to retrain yourself to seek that validation inside, seek that approval inside. At the very beginning, it's really hard to find that, you know, because the validation and the approval has always been centered in the other person. And so that's why the support network of other people who went through these situations is so important moving forward, because they get it. They know exactly what it's like to go through it. Someone said, I had a friend that was in a relationship with a narc. She almost dropped out of nursing school, but she pushed through it. It was hard for her, but I'm so proud of her because she is now a nurse, married to someone loving and truthful, and has a cute little newborn. That's great. That's great. That's amazing that she went ahead and pushed through school. It is really hard, you know, because when you're in that relationship, they will try anything to destroy anything that's important to you, your vision, your dreams and hopes for the future. And even afterward, even after you break up with them, it's so hard to focus on your dreams and your hopes for the future, your schooling, your work, you know, your art, whatever it is, because you still have all the emotional flashbacks. So that's wonderful that your friend was really able to stick to it. And then, you know, obviously she did some inner work. Because if she were able to attract someone new, someone loving and truthful, you know, and starting this new family, obviously she did some work, you know, to get there, because she's not attracting that same dynamic anymore. Or, you know, if she did, she recognized it and she said, pass, you know, the next time it came up. And the more you say pass to the things you don't want, the more you leave open that space for the universe to give you what you do want. And that's really what decision is. Decision means to cut away. You know, so when you make that decision, I don't want this, often we have to make that decision before we can make the decision of what we want. That's what dating is, right? You know, you go out on dates and you meet a bunch of people, and, you know, dating doesn't mean sex, right? Dating means you go out and meet people and you can see these qualities that they have, you know, and maybe at first you see some qualities you don't want anymore. That's those old patterns showing up again. No, thank you. And you don't see them again. You say, no, thank you. And no, thank you. No, thank you. You don't have to fill your life because you feel alone. You trust that you're going to say no to the wrong thing so that you leave space for the universe to magnetize the right thing in. And sometimes you just got to be really clear with the universe. That's not what I want anymore. And sometimes you get multiple, you know, lessons in that, multiple tests. And right after you make big decisions, I don't want this in my life anymore, you will immediately get what I call the law of verification. You will immediately get an opportunity from the universe. Are you sure? You know, here it is again. Are you sure you don't want that? And that's your opportunity to say pass again, so that you can leave that space open for something new. Okay, so this person said, I actually did drop out of school because my narc drained me so bad. Yeah, that happens a lot. I'm going back to school in the fall, kind of late, but my head is more clear. You know, it is never too late. And it's good that you took some time off to get healthy. You know, it's unfortunate that it got to that point, right? But it's good that you took that time to get healthy, to get clear, you know, because that brain fog and the confusion and the whole amygdala hippocampus, you know, thing that happens, it becomes very difficult to learn to transfer the short-term memory to the long-term memory, that would have made school a lot more complicated. Maybe you would have had to retake classes. Maybe you wouldn't have retained the information or gotten nearly, as involved with the information as you will now, because your head is a lot clearer. Sometimes you just have to take that space and time to heal and then go back to it later. Someone else said, it's never too late. Good for you. Best wishes and great vibes your way. Okay, what would be a good response for people that say, well, nobody is perfect, as if to justify their bad behavior? Yeah, I've heard that. What you'll notice, it's so annoying when they justify their actions with that statement. It really is. I call these the abuse mantras. Every abusive person has a mantra. They might have many, but they have one that's like their key thing. Growing up, right before my mom would force my brother to do something against his will or force him to lie or something, she would say, integrity is important to me. And then she would turn around and do the abusive thing. Just like that. That was her mantra. Integrity is important to me. Some people will say, all families are dysfunctional. When the abuse takes place in the family and you're the one who calls it out and says, this wasn't okay, this was abuse. And they say, all families are dysfunctional. That's a way of minimization. That's their mantra. That's what they tell themselves. This person who says, nobody's perfect, right? That's the person who has a lot of flaws, a lot of problems. And they tell you that so that you go, well, yeah, I guess that's true. We're all human and we all make mistakes and nobody's perfect, right? That's their mantra. And trust, yes, exactly. Trust that they're going to say that right before they do that thing. Maybe they said it after when you brought it up and you called them on the carpet, but trust that if that's their mantra, they're going to use that thing to justify their actions and they're going to keep doing it, and so if you're still in a relationship with a person like that, you can address that. You can say something like, true, you're right. When you start that, they love that. When you start off with, you're right. It's like, it just unlocks their defenses because they want to know they're right, right? You're right. Nobody's perfect. But this behavior is abusive. This behavior, specifically citing that behavior, this behavior is toxic. This behavior needs to change, and bring up the behavior. So don't attack their person, don't attack their character, even though that really is the problem, excuse me, but address the behavior because it's not as personal. And this behavior is a manipulative behavior. This behavior is a behavior that manipulative people use. If they keep pushing it to that point. I'm sorry. Super dry. That's a good one. Okay. Oh, my internet is unstable. Okay, hopefully everything's fine. But yeah, trust that, every abusive person has a mantra that they use to justify their behavior or to justify the past or to justify what they're continuing to do. My brother was dating this girl who would say something like, you only see in black and white, when really that was a projection of her own thing. But, it's when when you're asking a person to do something with you, like you ask them to go on vacation with you and you even offer to pay their way to go on a few days vacation with you, and they keep saying no, they don't have time to spend with you, but then their friends decide they want to go on vacation, and now this person's totally available to go on vacation with them, but not you. They didn't have time for you. And then you bring this up and you say, but this doesn't add up. And they say, you think in black and white. That's an abusive situation. That is a mantra that person is using to justify the abuse. So pay attention to those mantras and those things and, challenge that when it comes up. Point out the fact that you're right. Nobody's perfect. However, these are manipulative, aggressive behaviors. These are conscious, manipulative, aggressive behaviors. You're choosing to do these things. Someone added in, there are limits to the abusive behavior, and make sure the behavior doesn't continue over time. The behavior is inconsistent and erratic, like you're saying. Yeah, you'll find that, with the cluster B personality disorders, is how very inconsistent. Consistently inconsistent is one of the major signs of one of these disorders. All about this thing, and then not at all. Now they're all about the opposite thing, right? Or, they're doing this thing one day and now they're doing just the opposite thing. They're saying this thing and now they're saying just the opposite thing. When that kind of inconsistent, erratic behavior is taking place, oh, they hate this person and now they want to go spend time with them instead of hanging out with you. All of these kinds of things, red flags. Yep, it's crazy making. It is. Or twisting the stories or telling half-truths. Exactly. They're masters of that. Lying by omission. There's two kinds of lying. One is straight up telling a lie, something that's not true. And the other way is to lie by omission, to skirt around it and not to tell the full and complete truth. I wish we could grab all the narcs and take them back in time, like how the Christmas ghost would take the Scrooge back into his old memories of when he was cold to people. Maybe the narcs would finally have to face themselves and think, wow, am I really that bad? Probably not. But I always wonder that. I've had the same fantasy myself, that whole, Scrooge Christmas ghost thing. I wonder if they could see themselves, would they change or would they not? Would they just find the results so rewarding of their manipulative behavior that they don't want to change, even knowing full well how they're hurting and affecting other people, or justify themselves? Right. Okay, I think I'm caught up. Yeah, it would be interesting to see, if they had to face themselves and their behaviors and how they affect people, and would it change it or not? Maybe not. Someone adds in here, it's like a game for them. It's better not to play it. Indeed, it is a game. It's definitely a game. And that game is a zero-sum game, and it's set up for them to win and only them to win. And you are never to win. And so simply by playing that game, you lose. Like simply by walking on the field, you lose immediately. It's guaranteed you're going to lose, because even if you think you won this little battle right here, they're going to go off and they're going to lick their wounds, and they're probably going to come back with something much worse, because that's their game. Like they say, the house always wins. It's like going to Vegas, and it's set up that way. You just keep investing, the slot machine syndrome, as Dr. Simon calls it, where you sit at that slot machine long enough and you keep investing and you keep investing and you keep investing, and you don't want to get up because you're afraid that if you get up, is like the next moment you could miss the jackpot, or you could miss like the next big win. And that's the danger. That game was not set up for you to win. By default, you lose. Nothing is good enough. Exactly. Nothing is good enough. You're always going to lose, and that's the danger of even playing that game. Just don't play the game. Be real, be yourself. Exactly. Opting out. Someone asks, can they discard you in a nice way, or is it always in a harsh way? I don't think of any single nice. Your narc was nice, really. Were you discarded in a nice way? Wow. How did that go? If you would like to share, I'm really curious what the nice discard was. Because very typically, it's like the most cruel form possible. He said he wouldn't work out, but he still loved me, but it just wouldn't work because of our differences. Interesting. That's really interesting that that he went with that. I don't have a single experience of that. Normally, I've left the person because I figured it out, but there were a couple discards, And they were just like, yeah, super sudden and super cruel. That's really wild that he admitted that. In translation, he told me I have to be his mother's bitch. You mean what he was saying was like, he meant it was like a double entendre. He actually wanted you to understand that if you weren't his mother's bitch, you wouldn't work out because you had differences or something. Yes. Or was that okay? Wow. Okay. So it was still, an underhanded put down, basically telling you that if you weren't his mom's bitch, things wouldn't work out. He would still love you, but you have differences because you won't, submit to the mother. Yeah, that's pretty wild. Okay, so it was probably a more covert discard is probably how I would classify that. Sorry, it's hard to explain because he couldn't control me or get his way. We wouldn't work out. Right. Right. So yeah, that's the covert discard. I think perhaps the more overt discard is like the overly cruel sort of way, rude, but not over the top. Exactly. It was an underhanded kind of subtle put down. Like, you're not good enough because you wouldn't do this, you know? So it just, sorry, it wouldn't work out because we're just too different. I feel like I've heard something like this before, but it's not coming to mind yet. I think I missed something here too. Oh, okay. So the person who initially asked that question said, as a suggestion, like maybe I'm not ready for a relationship right now. I definitely heard that before. Actually, okay, now I got it. The ones that I heard on this were the people who wanted an open relationship, a polyamorous relationship versus a monogamous relationship. So if we were dating for a while, and after, some time, I was like, so nobody was talking about it, but I was like, it's time to talk about it. Are we seeing each other exclusively, or are we seeing other people? I'm interested in monogamy. I'm not interested in seeing other people. And then the person, would discard or basically leave you the ultimatum. Like, if you want to be with me, it's me and everybody else I'm sleeping with or want to sleep with or could sleep with, or it's not. If you want monogamy, I'm not the person for you, kind of deal. I've definitely heard that before. Um, Someone was asking if he hoovered her, but now he's still trying. Oops. Now he's still trying to get his way. He's rude, but not over the top. And I was like, great, now leave me alone. And he won't. He was awful to me during the whole relationship. I wish he ended it badly because then I'd not feel so bad for him. He's so good in being soft to make me weak. He told me to leave, watched me pack for days, never even helped. And then when I was out, asked me to come back and told me I was selfish. Yeah. Yeah, those are very common behaviors. It's like it's the passive aggression, and then waiting till you get out and then asking you back. My sociopathic former business partner did this too. Pushed me out of the business, was supposed to pay me this money for the buyout, never paid me. We signed a contract. And then when I wrote him, after having left the country and everything, came back home, and I wrote him like, where's the money that you owe me? And then he basically asked me if I wanted to go back and work for them again. And I'm like, are you nuts? Like, he actually thought I would go back, just like in this situation, like this person just thought you would go back. But when they use the softness, you're right. That's the harder one, to write off, when they're still being kind and showing you the softness, but because they're trying to prey on that weakness. But usually what happens is, if you keep ignoring the soft attempts, it usually flips aggressive pretty quickly. They try, I love you, I miss you, you're the best thing that ever happened to me, I really value you, and you don't give them what they want, then very quickly it usually flips to, oh, you must just be a horrible person to live with or be married to, or, you really have a problem with whatever, it flips very quickly when they don't get what they want. He told me I was selfish for not calling his mom and making things right when she was the one to stomp all over me. They both wanted me to be their doormat. I was floored. Yeah, they were nice about it undercover, but it was cruel. Yeah. Yeah, because that's what they do. They get you to take the blame. They get you to take the responsibility for it. They get you to apologize for not letting them walk all over you, right? It's so textbook, these behaviors. And you were right to leave. I'm so glad that you were strong enough to do that and to not fall into that pressure. Because, when he's attacking your character and he's, basically like, he's probably attacking something that he knows is important to you, like your compassion or your patience or the way that you help people and take care of people. And then he's trying to make you out to be, a cruel person for not wanting to help or for not wanting to put up with that, and accepting that she is who she is or whatever, and love her anyways and hang out with her anyways. Let me see. Did I miss something here? Okay, someone added in, sounds to me he is a narc player. Is that what you want? I wouldn't. Just be yourself and be real and tell him how you feel and be firm. Someone else said, yes, they will turn cruel very quickly. They do. When you don't give them what they want with the sweetness, it'll flip. Because, it's the idealization, the devaluation, and it's both in the cycle. So when you don't respond to the idealization, then they flip it to the devaluation. Then they try to get you to respond to the negativity. The smear campaigns are awful. Yes, that reminds me. People keep asking me to make a video about that. I need to do that soon. The mom is trying to tell the whole family how awful I am for leaving him. Luckily, most of them know better. Well, half of them. Yeah. Yeah, that's that smear campaign. And it's so sad and frustrating when they do that, because the trick is to hook you into the self-defense. I think we were talking in the earlier session today about the self-defense, and that's what they want. They want to trick you into the self-defense, because if you're busy defending yourself, then you're not paying attention to the abusive behaviors that they're doing, because all your focus is on you and how you could do better and you could be better and you can give more, right? Because they always want more and more and more. And the danger is to think that, well, if I just give a little more, they'll want to give more. But it doesn't work that way, because takers are takers are takers, and you're giving more, they're happy. You're giving more, they're like, hey, great, everything's working out just fine. They don't have that mutual reciprocity. When someone does something kind for you or generous for you or sweet for you, you have like this sense of mutual reciprocity probably that kicks in, and you want to do something kind for them or return that kindness somehow. And so they prey upon that, but their conscience doesn't work the same. They don't have that same reciprocity. In fact, they're just going to keep taking and taking. This person said, I stopped defending myself. There is no point. They thought I was nuts when I tried to. Exactly. That's the whole point of that smear campaign. And getting the flying monkeys involved is to make you look like you're crazy, to make you think that you're crazy. So you did good to stop defending yourself. Though I know it's like the biggest temptation when someone is attacking you, saying false accusations about you. It's like the biggest temptation is to go ahead and defend yourself. Nothing is good enough. You'll drain your energy. Yeah. Takers are takers. They just keep taking. Like this person said, yeah, they do. They just keep taking. The more you give, the more they'll take. It doesn't trigger that reciprocity. Like walking on eggshells or minefield. It is. And that's the point where you're delicate about what you're going to say, and you don't want to offend them, because if you say something that has even the slightest bit that sounds like a criticism, they're going to take that and become enraged and then attack you. That's how that goes. And then you end up, like kind of like repressing your self-expression. You don't say the things that need to be said. You don't talk about the abuse, or the horrible things that are happening, because you're afraid that if you bring it up, you're going to be attacked for that, because they're going to take it badly, and they're going to turn it on you. They're going to twist it on you. And somehow it's your fault and you're to blame when you're not, so avoid the temptation of the self-defense. That's the hook. And it's really hard. It's definitely easier said than done, because as soon as it gets flipped on you, your first reaction is going to be to defend yourself, to vindicate yourself. But don't fall into that trap. Any other questions you guys have? Let me grab it. Okay. Okay. Address the abuse. It boils down on how you feel after the interaction. It does. It does. Because if you feel angry, if you feel icky, if you feel like something wasn't resolved, not a good sign, right? Means the person was not taking responsibility. Possibly you took on the blame for everything that happened. Yes. Okay. Question here. I wanted to bring this up because I'm having a hard time getting over what I did. On New Year's Eve, my ex verbally abused me into tears and ditched plans with me before we were going out. I was going to stay in and lay in my bed all night. A friend talked me into going out with her. I went out and buried all my feelings from earlier. I was so angry at my narc that I kissed another person. It was wrong of me. I felt so ashamed and terrible the following day. Even now, years later, I feel that. I felt like I was no better than the narc. My stomach is in knots. Oh, sweetheart, you can forgive yourself for that now. Uh-oh, internet unstable. Okay. I don't know what happened to the internet. You can forgive yourself for that now. You know, like, you are a good person with a very healthy conscience. And that's why that bothered you. You knew that it was wrong to kiss that person. It was an action that you took out of anger. We were talking about this earlier today in the earlier session, which I'll post later, where they do this. Like, they make you angry to that point. And then if you're so angry, sometimes you make decisions that are out of alignment with your own integrity, because the anger was blinding, you know, because you were so upset because of how they provoked you and that sort of thing. And that's the danger of reacting to the anger, you know. And all of us, all of us, you're not alone. All of us did these things. You know, those of us who are honest with ourselves are going to admit that all of us did things that were against our character, against our integrity, things that we normally wouldn't do, things that we're deeply ashamed of, maybe even years later, and maybe even have regrets about. And honestly, a little kiss wasn't even a horrible, horrible thing, you know. So people have done much worse, you know, and regretted significantly worse later. It's okay. Like, now looking back, you understand what happened. You understand that because of the anger that happened, that you took this action, you know, and that's why it happened, and that you don't need to do that again. You know, moving forward, if you should ever be in that situation again, you know now that you wouldn't do that. That's what that guilt is telling you. That guilt is telling you that you did something against your integrity and your beliefs, and you don't want to do that again. I just saw someone raise their hand. Did someone want to say something? Someone added in here, that's nothing compared to what narcs do. Just my opinion. Self-compassion, love. You were hurting. It's called being a human being. It is. You know, when we take these actions like that because of what had happened, that's the worst thing, is then, you know, we feel the responsibility and the blame when the problem was the abuse. Like, you would never have done that if it weren't for this horrible situation that had happened and him making you feel awful, you know, and then wanting to be with someone else or wanting to kiss someone else, you know. That's what happens. It's like they drive you to that point of insanity. And that's why it's so dangerous to be there. You can lose your health, you can lose your sanity, and you can make decisions that go against your integrity that can stick with you for a long time, you know, and haunt you even emotionally, psychologically, because you feel like a bad person for having done it. So work on the forgiveness on that, on the self-forgiveness, you know, forgiving yourself for taking that action, recognizing why you took that action, owning the responsibility of having done that, you know, because he didn't like shove your face into that person, right? Recognizing that that was a response to the abuse. You know, it wasn't the healthiest response, but now moving forward, what you learn from that is that you wouldn't do that again. You know, you would make a different decision. so that it doesn't have to keep weighing on you. You know, sometimes the self-forgiveness is the hardest part. Sometimes it's a lot easier to forgive the other person for their transgressions against you, and a lot harder to forgive yourself for your transgressions against your own integrity, you know, because it's your character, because you're a good person. That's how you know you're a good person. When stuff like that bothers you, something you did bothers you, that's a sign. You know, that guilt is a sign of a person with a healthy sense of conscience. Someone else added in, learn from your mistakes and move forward and get out of the toxic relationship. That person said, I mean, I wouldn't do that anymore at this point, now that I'm more self-aware, but I'm not judging anyone. Yeah, that's good. So you learn from that, you know, and that's really all you can extract from that is the lesson. What happened, what you learned from that, and how you would change your behavior moving forward, how you would not do that again. Someone else said, yes, it was a response. I agree. And that other person said, thanks, it's been weighing on me. I never wanted to do that. I feel a lot better talking about it. Yeah. Yeah. Now you can just let that go. Right? I forgive myself. Right? That's your homework tonight is the self-forgiveness. Do a little meditation. You're welcome. Do a little meditation, you know, something maybe when you're laying down in bed, and follow it up with a gratitude practice, you know, something that you're grateful for in relation to this. Like, you're grateful that, like you mentioned, you now have the self-awareness. You have your binaural beats. Good. You now have the self-awareness of what happened. You now know that moving forward, you would recognize that you wouldn't take that action. You know, you're grateful for, and fill in the blank, because that gratitude is what seals the deal on the work that you're doing. You know, the forgiveness work, and then fill it in with gratitude. So it takes the place of the old guilt, right? The gratitude comes in and fills that place. Someone has a hand up. Did you want to say something, or did you accidentally hit the button? Because that happens sometimes, I know. Gratitude is a peaceful place. Yes, it is indeed. It makes me feel warm and fuzzy. Good. That's when you know it's working. That's when you know it's working. That warm, fuzzy, delicious feeling. Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up for this evening. Thank you all for attending. Thank you for prioritizing your self-healing, for sharing your vulnerabilities. I'm sending you all a big hug, and I hope to see you soon. You're welcome.